Welcome to your Chapter 4 video lecture. Let's go ahead and get started. This particular chapter is another one that's a little bit all over the place because it's going over some background science information that you should have gotten from middle school and from 9th grade biology. Most of this you really only need to know from a surface point of view at this time. Although I am going to be referring to some chemistry, you don't need to have taken chemistry in order to do well in this class, so just don't panic. Alright, the first concept we're going to talk about is bioremediation. What it is, how it was featured in the cleanup of the Exxon Valdez oil spill, what exactly it's doing, and what are some other applications for it. So, bioremediation is the use of living organisms other than plants in order to clean up some sort of waste or pollution. In almost every case, it is bacteria. So in this case that you see there in the left-hand corner, that is a picture of folks cleaning up an oil spill, much in the way that bacteria was used to help clean up the Exxon Valdez oil spill. Now, the majority of the oil spill was cleaned up in the traditional ways, skimming it off the surface of the water, burning it away, simply power washing the shoreline. However, there is a natural occurring oil-eating microbe, as you can see there in the lower right-hand corner, that uses the hydrocarbons, hydrogen and carbon long chains, which is what makes up crude oil, uses that as its food source. And so they were bred and concentrated and then sprayed on areas that were deemed too environmentally sensitive to, let's say, pressure wash, and then also into the water, along with some fertilizer to enhance the growth of the bacteria. Now, obviously this is not a short-term quick fix because it does take time for this to occur. Applications for Exxon Valdez went over the course of a couple of years. So this is a long-term fix. Upside, natural. This is naturally occurring stuff. When the bacteria runs out of oil, they die off. Downside is this is something that takes place over the course of years. Now, what other type of chemical can some bacteria degrade? There are some that are specific to cleaning up pesticides, which are poisons that are used to kill everything from insects to weeds. Whenever there is a spill of that, you can actually use bioremediation to clean it up. And again, remember what two elements comprise almost all of crude oil's chemical structure. That would be carbon and hydrogen. Alright, the next topic we're going to talk about briefly is matter. What is the law of conservation of matter? That is that matter can neither be created nor destroyed. All the matter that we have on Earth is all the matter we will have on Earth. We don't have a lot of stuff coming in or leaving the planet. So how does that apply to AP Environmental Science? And that is that there is no way with relation to waste and pollution. So whenever we put something somewhere, we have to be mindful that this globe is a closed system, and whatever we do with it is going to impact something somewhere at some time. And also, how does this relate to nutrient cycling? When you talk about water having to cycle through the environment, or nitrogen or carbon, if something gets hung up somewhere, removed from the environment as pollution and then stored away, it can't re-enter the nutrient cycle. So that's something we're going to talk about a little bit later on. Although your book does mention, for the next question, which four elements are especially abundant in living organisms, your book does mention a lot of different ones. There are four major elements that comprise most of what a living thing has in it. And that would be carbon, which is C, hydrogen, which is H, oxygen, which is O, and nitrogen, which is N. The acronym that you can use to remember that is CHON. Alright, the next question that you have is, what are the names of the particles in an atom, where are they found, and what are their charges? If you look at the graphic there in the right-hand corner, hopefully that looks familiar. That is a schematic of an atom. Two parts. You have the nucleus, which is a small, hard center part, and then you have the electrons orbiting around it. We'll go ahead and talk about the nucleus first. That is comprised of two types of particles: protons, which have a positive charge, and neutrons, which have no charge whatsoever. The little bits that orbit, much in the same way that planets orbit the sun. Those are electrons. They're very tiny and they have a negative charge. There are the same number of protons as there are electrons, so the overall charge of that atom is 0. And we will talk a little bit later as to why it is important that we talk about charges and electrons in particular. Alright, the next couple of slides are very brief reviews. There are no questions attached to these, but in case I happen to refer to this stuff in class, you know what the heck it is I'm talking about. So, know the difference between physical and chemical changes. Physical changes essentially change the way something looks and not what it is made of, which is, again, not its chemical composition. A chemical change is where there is no going back. Something chemically has occurred and you've created a new substance. Know that protons and neutrons together make up an atom's atomic mass. The count of protons and neutrons added together is its mass number. I believe that's one of your vocabulary words. Understand that electrons comprise next to no amount of an atom's mass. Also know that although they weigh next to nothing, they are responsible for the chemical properties of an atom. So how they react and essentially why it is they do what they do. And the periodic table is a listing of all of the elements that we have here on planet Earth. Stuff to the left are metals, stuff to the right are nonmetals, and then there is a diagonal slice of things that are called metalloids that have properties of both but are neither. Alright, leading into the next bit of questions. Well, almost. Do you know what an element is? That's just one type of atom. Know what the atomic number is. That's the number of protons in an atom. Know that the number of electrons is the same, which means that an atom has no charge, and then the atomic mass is the mass of however many protons there are in there plus the mass of the neutrons. Alright, isotopes is the next thing. How do isotopes differ from each other? It's simply the number of neutrons. So go ahead and look at these 3 isotopes of carbon. All of the carbon that everything is made of is a mix of these 3 guys for the most part, and you can see that they differ in the number of neutrons that they have. As a side note, why is this important? This radioactive carbon-14, that is how we know how old things are, including fossils. So this may blow your mind. Everything around you is radioactive to some degree, and we're going to address what makes something radioactive here momentarily. Alright, kind of a little detour to the science behind the stories on page 90 through 91 of your textbook. What is phytoremediation? That is the cleansing of soil and or water with plants. Name one type of plant that can be used for phytoremediation. I've given you 2 here. There is the common reed in the upper left-hand corner, and then cattails, which you see all over Southwest Florida in the lower right. So upper right, in the lower right. Here on the left, you can see plants are being used to clean water that has come out of a wastewater treatment plant. So the water comes in contaminated with human sludge, and it leaves clean enough for you to drink. Now, the science behind the story specifically talks about metals such as selenium, zinc, cadmium, and tungsten being removed from substances by these plants. And essentially what they do is they take them in with their roots in the same way that they take in nutrients to survive, and they concentrate them in their tissues. Now, downside, that makes the plant toxic, and they usually have to be harvested and then put into a secure facility. Upside is that the soil and or water that they were being used to treat are now fit for public consumption. These are also used to treat things that have arsenic in them, which is a metalloid. Alright, so back to isotopes. What does it mean for an isotope to be radioactive? Why is this sometimes a problem? And how does an element's half-life relate to this radioactivity? Radioactivity is where a radioactive element sheds subatomic particles in high-energy radiation in order to become a stable version of that particular element. This high-energy radiation subatomic particles, provided that they are strong enough in terms of the energy and moving fast enough in terms of the particles, can kill you. Things with low levels of radiation, such as carbon-14, not a big deal. Things with high level of radiation, like uranium, their application of an atomic bomb should tell you that they are lethal. Now, how does a half-life play into this? A half-life is the amount of time that it takes for half of a radioactive sample to decay and become a stable, non-radioactive isotope. Okay, this, first of all, it's not disappearing. It is going from the radioactive parent material to the non-radioactive daughter material. And the half-life, basically the shorter the half-life, the less time something in general is lethal to people. Cobalt-60, it's going to be a problem to work with for a certain amount of time. Something like uranium that has a half-life of millions of years is in essence always going to be lethal to people no matter what. When we start talking about nuclear power plants and how we use this as a source of energy, you'll begin to understand why the consideration of half-lives and the disposal of radioactive materials becomes problematic. Alright, some more basic definitions. How are ions different from atoms? They have either gained or lost an electron to create a charge within that particular atom, a group of atoms. Now remember that an electron is negative. So when something gains an extra electron, it becomes negatively charged, and when it loses an electron, it becomes positively charged, because then there's more protons than there are electrons. And here are some examples: H plus and Cl minus. Now, what makes a compound different from atoms is that a compound is formed by the chemical combination of two or more elements, two or more atoms. This is not a physical change, it is a chemical change, because when those things are put together, it takes very unusual circumstances, not very unusual, but it takes unusual circumstances to bust those things apart. Some of this also is just basic information. You only have to know this in the most surfaced of senses. This may also help you with your vocabulary. So you've got two types of bonds, ionic and covalent. Ionic bonds are between a metal and a non-metal. Those are called salts. Covalent are is a type of bond between two nonmetals. Those are called molecules, and on occasion they can have a part that is slightly positively charged and a part that's slightly negatively charged, which makes them what's called polar, which is like a magnet, and they stick together in the way that magnets do. If they don't have a slightly positive and a slightly negative part, they are called nonpolar, and they don't really stick together. Okay, this explains this again. Electrons are transferred, and then covalent bonds, those electrons are shared, and again, those are called molecules. Alright, there are some compounds that you just need to memorize. Water, carbon dioxide, methane, and ozone. You can pause the slide to write this stuff down, but to explain what this means. Each one of those letters stands for an element. The number, the subscript, which is this little number here, tells you how many of each element that came before it there are in the whole compound. So water is made of 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. Carbon dioxide is made of 1 carbon and 2 oxygens. Methane is made of 1 carbon and 4 hydrogens. And ozone is simply made of 3 oxygens. Alright, next. What is the what is the chemical formula for water? What is the compound that facilitates all life on Earth? Again, that's water, and water is H2O. What type of intermolecular interaction is responsible for some of the most important qualities of water, which is everything from surface tension to the fact that ice, which is the solid of water, is less dense than its liquid counterpart, which is very rare. And that would be hydrogen bonds. This word bond is misleading. It is actually a force that occurs between 2 different molecules of water, where the slightly positive hydrogens stick to the slightly negative oxygens, in the same way, again, that magnets orient each other, with the positive and the negative ends kind of sticking together. So this is responsible for surface tension, for cohesion when water sticks to stuff, for ice being less dense than water, which is why ponds survive through the winter, which is something we'll talk about a little bit later on in the year. So again, just be aware of the hydrogen bonding aspect. Alright, pH scale. Which ion is associated with acidity? That's H+, with basicity, that's OH-. And here's the pH scale. Here's what this means for you. When we start talking about pollution and we start talking about pH in which things can live, this becomes important. So you need to kind of understand what these numbers mean. 7 is neutral. That is like the water that you buy at the grocery store that says it's deionized water. It comes in a little jug. It has equal amounts of H pluses and OH minuses in it. Both of those things, when the concentrations build up, can become toxic to life. It's interesting to note that rain, as it falls out of the sky when it's not polluted, is slightly acidic. Do be aware that things that are acidic, stuff with H plus in it, range from 0 to 7, and the strength of an acid increases as you move from 7 to 0. Things that are basic, see the word alkalinity is used there, it's the same thing. Basicity increases from 7 to 14. That increase as you move from one number, from 7 to 8, from 8 to 9, and from 9 to 10, that increases the strength. It indicates an increase in strength of tenfold. So in other words, something with an acid with a pH of 5 is 10 times as strong as an acid with a pH of 6. So it increases by a factor of 10 as you move towards opposite ends of that scale. Alright, next topic is organic. This is not referring to like organic food. And when you say organic food, that indicates how something was grown. This type of organic refers to the type of atoms and the type of bonds that are within a molecule. So something which is an organic compound contains carbon-carbon bonds and usually carbon-hydrogen bonds. Something that is inorganic does not have these types of bonds. So things like NaCl, table salt, or water, H2O. Organic molecules are either occur in nature or they can be made in the lab. Again, the word organic in this particular case has nothing to do with something being quote-unquote natural or not. Alright, macromolecules and polymers. Macromolecules are simply really large molecules that help make life possible. And there's 4 of them. There's proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids. Know in just the very surface sense as to what these things are. Proteins are largely found in living tissue. We associate those with muscle for the most part. Lipids are things like fat and oils. They're used for long-term storage of energy, and they also comprise the cell walls. Carbohydrates are short-term energy. They either provide energy now or they're short-term storage for near future use. And the nucleic acids are the things that DNA and RNA are made of. You do not need to worry about the whole GATC thing that you learn in biology. Alright, what is a polymer? A polymer is simply a long chain of repeated molecules. Proteins, nucleic acids, and carbohydrates fall into this category. You don't need to memorize that. What I do want for you to know is what man-made polymers are used for, and those are plastics, and plastics are found everywhere, from the lining of metal cans to your water bottles to car parts. Plastics are found basically everywhere in our life at this point, and they will become a very big topic of conversation a little bit later on in the class. Alright, prokaryotes versus eukaryotes. Please realize that this picture is of prokaryotes only. It is simply showing you the difference between plant cells and animal cells. Excuse me, it's not prokaryotes only, those are eukaryotes only. My apologies. So, eukaryotes are usually, well, they're always plant, animal, fungi, and protists. They're usually multicellular. They usually have specialized tissues, and each of the individual cells has organelles in a membrane-bound nucleus. Prokaryotes are bacterias, and they have no organelles, no membrane-bound nucleus, and they are usually single-celled. You do not need to know all of these names, the smooth endoplasmic reticulum and all of that stuff. Don't worry about it. Just, at the most, know maybe that plants have cell walls in their cells and animal cells do not, and that plants do that crazy photosynthesis thing with these little chloroplasts that look like stacked coins. Good enough. Alright, differentiate between potential and kinetic energy. Potential energy is the energy of position or stored energy, and kinetic energy is the energy of motion. The conversion process between potential energy and kinetic energy is something we will be discussing all year long, especially with effect with respect to efficiency. All right, the two laws of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics is that energy, like matter, can neither be created nor destroyed. You can only change its form. Then the total energy of a system, in this case the planet Earth, remains constant. You cannot create more energy than goes into whatever process you're talking about. The second law of thermodynamics is more often referred to as the law of entropy, but what you need to know for this class is that when you change energy from one form to another, not only is the new form of energy of a lower quality than the old form of energy, we'll explain what that means in a little bit, you also lose some of the energy, usually in the form of heat. Here are some examples. 16% of the energy in gasoline powers a car, while the rest is lost as heat. Incandescent bulbs are only 5% efficient. The energy you put into a bulb, 95% of it is lost as waste heat. Again, this becomes important when we start talking about energy sources in second semester. You can never recycle or reuse high-quality energy to perform useful work. Once you use it once, it's done. It's in heat, and you cannot trap heat in a bottle and use it later. Here is a graphic of the second law of thermodynamics. All right. Although this is matter quality, this also refers to energy quality. High quality energy is very concentrated and easily accessible and useful right away, like a piece of coal that you use to burn. Low quality energy is disperses, and you can't really use it for a whole lot. A good example of that would be the heat that you get when you burn coal. It's gone rather rapidly, and you can't exactly bundle it up and use it for later. So again, coal is a high quality energy, heat is a low quality energy. This is also showing you forms of high quality and low quality matter. We'll talk about that later. All right. Stay at this slide for a second. How do autotrophs make food chains and food webs possible? They are the only things on planet Earth that bring energy into the system, and they do that through photosynthesis. Nothing else brings energy in. And we're going to talk a little bit later on in this quarter as to the ramifications on how big food webs and food chains can get because of the second law of thermodynamics. You must memorize the chemical formula and this whole equation for photosynthesis exactly as it is listed. Using words, this says water plus carbon dioxide yields glucose plus oxygen. That is not enough. You have to memorize the whole 6H2O plus 6CO2 yields C6H12O6 plus 6O2. You must also memorize the chemical equation for aerobic respiration, but if you notice, it is the exact opposite of that for photosynthesis. All right. Oh, one more thing. I'm sorry. Please also notice that this is the one way that we get carbon from the air to get fixed in plants. See, here's carbon from the air. Carbon dioxide gets fixed into plants as sugar, and then that carbon gets transferred to us through the ingestion of plants and then through aerobic respiration. So this is how we get the carbon to make ourselves carbon-based life forms. All right, chemosynthesis. How is chemosynthesis different from photosynthesis? It is a way of creating this magical glucose molecule without the benefit of sunlight. So bacteria at the bottom of the ocean in these things called hydrothermal vents, also known as smokers, use hydrogen sulfide to go ahead and create that glucose. Please notice that one of the byproducts is sulfuric acid. So these guys are kind of badasses because they also live in a vent which is hundreds and hundreds of degrees hot, and that's degrees Fahrenheit. I am not requiring you to learn the chemosynthesis equation. Just be aware that this occurs without light, so if the sun were suddenly to go dark, these guys wouldn't know about it, and their entire little ecosystem down here would continue to happily go on without the benefit of sunlight. Alright, so I am never going to talk about the origins of life in this class. However, talking about evolution is a non-negotiable process because I can show you examples of evolution having taken place in the past 10 to 20 years in which organisms have significantly become altered because of the process of natural selection, which is something you'll get to know really well here in a unit or two. So, fossil records tell us a whole bunch of stuff. They confirm that evolution has actually happened. They express that the vast majority of all species that ever existed are already extinct. They document mass extinctions when like 95% of the stuff on the planet suddenly died out. And then they also provide atmospheric and climate history for us. What were weather conditions like a long time ago? What was the composition of the atmosphere a long time ago? And then this little dude down here, what is the name of this branched illustration? That is called the Tree of Life. And what does it represent? It represents the evolution of organisms into our modern biodiversity, which includes bacteria, eukaryota, and the archaea, which are some really weird critters that live usually in extreme situations. That concludes your Chapter 4 video lecture.